Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, which is now out. Before we get into it, I want to know what's your stance overall, like on Zack Snyder, because he has his super fans, he has his not for me's, he has his in the middles.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on his filmography?
I'm a fan, man. I would consider myself like he makes no mistakes. He's flawless. He's just the greatest ever. I'm not in that camp. But respect people. Everyone has their favorite directors and storytellers and whatnot. But no, I'm a fan though. Whether it's Dawn of the Dead, 300, Watchmen, I'm a fan of all of his, DCEU films, especially his definitive cuts, whether that's, BVS or Justice League. But at the same time, I can see, the flaws. He's not the greatest when it comes to story, as far as, narratively speaking. I think sometimes he focused so much on the visuals, which, going back to, I compare James Wan to Sam Raimi. I compare a lot of what Snyder does to like George Miller or Ridley Scott sometimes, where they're visuals and their storytelling, is very visually told, in a sense that sometimes it carries the film and sometimes the more detailed story beats, dialogue, and all that stuff comes second to the visuals, comes second to the spectacle of their story. So, and that sometimes, for better or for worse, can affect the overarching story that they're focusing on. But nevertheless, I think he is someone that is a definitive director, which I always would prefer a director that has a style, and has like a distinct type of skill that they bring to filmmaking. You can't just look at a Zack Snyder film like, wait, who directed this? Like, it's Zack Snyder when you see his movies. So, and again, for better or for worse, I think he takes a lot of creative swings. Some of them work, some of them don't. But to answer your initial question, I for the most part, I like most of his films, and again, his definitive cuts of his films more than anything.
I'm not like as big on Batman versus Superman or
Mhm.
Justice League as some might be. Or I really enjoyed 300. I thought Watchmen was pretty good. I Which one was it? Army of the Dead I thought was all right. I didn't love
Mhm.
Sucker Punch. Man of Steel I really like, but overall I'm still curious whenever he makes movies because again
Yeah.
he really insists on his movies being out there, and that's again something that's really unique to him. I do think the whole two-part thing that a lot of movies are doing now, starting with this year, interestingly, is getting a little overblown. Like, it might have worked with Spider Verse, might have worked with Mission Impossible. Fast and Furious, I don't think it was that earned,
Yeah.
that one. This one, I'll have to watch the next one, but I wasn't big on this one either. That's all I'll say. I wasn't huge on it. There's some action scenes that I think are solid. There's one character. Shoot, let me make sure I know this actor's name. Oh, okay, Duna Bay. Her character has an intro action scene that I think is really good, and Sofia Boutella I
Oh,
think is a really good
is that Nemesis? Is
protagonist.
that the Nemesis character?
Yeah, she has these two lightsabers, which I think is kind of cool. Sophia Boutella, I thought was quite good as a protagonist, and usually I think we see her as a lot more like mysterious characters. Which I mean,
Yeah.
here she starts out that way, but we get to empathize with her a lot more. Miku Hausman, I also thought was great, but a lot of the other performances I thought were kind of questionable. Like Charlie Hunnam, usually I love the guy.
Hmm.
I don't know about here. Ed Skrein, I thought he was very hateable, but at
Hmm.
one point also his villain kind of got on my nerves. Ray Fisher was pretty good. Anthony Hopkins did a great voice performance. But besides that, I do think this one was a little uninspired. I try to like take it with a grain of salt that this is a Netflix movie, but there were some visuals that sometimes it stood out in a really good way and other times in a
Yeah.
really negative way, like a lack of lighting or the visual effects kind of like the wider shots looking like not too great.
Hmm.
And a lot of people have probably already said this. It does borrow from other movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, even Seven Samurai. You could
Yeah.
compare it to like Dune or The Fifth Element. And so I think, unfortunately, that sometimes does weigh on a movie when it's the worst one in the comparison.
Yeah, man, this one, where I was able to accept kind of the goofiness and cheesiness of like Aquaman. This one, I came in with a little bit more expectations because, like I had mentioned, I'm normally a fan of Zack Snyder, and I knew a lot about the history of this film. This is like 20 years in the making. This is like his passion project, and knowing all of that going to this film, I'm expecting. Again, I knew he was going to take, and the whole thing was He went to Lucasfilm to pitch a Star Wars film. They said, no, a rated R Star Wars film. They're like, no, we don't really thank you, but no thank you. So I'm like, oh, we're gonna get like a mature, super badass, Zack Snyder Star Wars type of movie. And there is a lot of Star Wars references. Korra is essentially Luke Skywalker. We have an Emperor. We have a Darth Vader. I mean, we have a Han Solo. Like, there are a lot of Star Wars influences. But again, knowing that this was like a passion project, Zack Snyder's been, they want to make this into its own Star Wars. Like, this is supposed to be the launching pad to a entire franchise of video games, comics, spin-offs, shows. So I'm thinking and I love science fiction. I'm thinking we're going to get some original, awesome
Hmm.
sci-fi, and original was the furthest that this was. This just felt like a copy and paste type of movie. The characters were just so lacking any depth, which is a whole nother conversation in itself, that there is another, again, Snyder cut out there that fleshes things out more, which is just so. I understand that he likes to do that, but at some point, as a fan of cinema, it's getting frustrating that you can't tell a story with just one film. Like, he has to have so many different swings at the bat to tell a story, which is just baffling, because it makes this film seem lesser, because it is a lesser, dried out diet version of a story. We're hopping around from planet to planet doing the same song and dance. Again, the story is just so bland and generic and very uninspiring. The general plot of like saving this village of people that we only spend the first 10 minutes of the movie and we never go back. There's no weight to this film. That's the thing. There's literally no weight to the
Hmm.
circumstances, to the characters. No spoilers, but a character dies, and when he dies, it's like, who cares? We just met you, dude. Like, it's a lot of stuff that just fell flat to me. Again, from the school of Hard Knocks, of visual cool storytelling and cool characters. Like, Zach always loves the cool and the awesome things. The actions,
Yeah.
exciting. It's, entertaining. But, I want more than that, Zach. I want more story. I want more character developments. And to, glass half full, glass half empty conversation, it is always good that you want your audience to want more, but it's also a detriment to this movie that you missed out on the potential of giving us that, instead of us waiting 6 months to get the full version of the story and the characters. Like, that's not, something I'm that keen on with this film. Is like, just as a teaser, just take this PG-13, edit it down version, and come back later to see the real version of this film. This was just a pretty much a trailer
Yeah.
for the actual movie.
And they did a similar thing with Napoleon, where Ridley Scott was sort of teasing the
Oh my goodness,
director's
yeah,
cut, the 4 hour cut already,
yeah,
and it's kind of just like phased out on me. Like, I don't like this whole idea where it's like you need two swings at a movie, especially the fact that the director announces it right away. Like, I kind of just like watching a movie, even with the extended cut. This already being 2 hours and 13 minutes, I already started to feel like there was a lack of momentum, a lack of structure. And seeing the Zack Snyder's cut where of Justice League, where I think the 4 hour pacing already started to like suck out a lot of the momentum of the flow of the pace. I can only imagine what that would be for Rebel Moon. There is sometimes a feeling of like editing away to make it look too PG-13, which again, I don't mind a movie being PG-13, like original sci-fi movie. You kind of need to bring in a tween audience, which I'm cool with. But I did feel like there was like a little too much cutting, because like they were like showing like an inch of blood, and then they would like cut to like a
yeah.
perspective of someone's gun for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, yeah, that was a little odd. And also the whole setup, there's like a an opening sort of 25 minutes, which I guess is like the hook of the movie, which is
Yeah.
like the inciting incident. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was so poorly paced, like all the way down to like Corey Stoll's weird accent, and and like the annoying side soldiers. I think that was why I was saying like the look was really plain. Is in those first 30 minutes, it kind of felt like there's, you saw like this cool backdrop of the planet, but there was no like color grading to it. It didn't feel like Dune, where there was like where you could feel like the reflection of the sun and the sand on them,
Right. I mean, yeah, this
which
Zack
was
Snyder is great visual director, but a lot of times, a lot of his worlds are CGI generated. Versus, like you just mentioned, I'm a big Denis Villeneuve fan, and that was on
yeah.
location for most of their big spectacle scenes. Where this is just all over a green screen, and you can feel that it's disattached.
it does have like this Guardians of the Galaxy like element where it's like a bunch of misfits. And they're the
Mm.
galaxy's only hope against a greedy tyrant. But there's some people where it's just like their only characteristic is that they're a former general or that they like guns. Yeah, there's this one character who's basically Tarzan, and
Oh,
that whole scene was like,
Turek or something like that. Yeah.
is that his name? Yeah.
Yeah, Turek or something. Yeah, the
Tor-
the guy that tamed
okay, yeah.
the
So
bird animal. Yeah.
yeah, so that scene I think had like the worst CGI
That
of
scene was
the
so
movie probably.
drawn out. Yeah.
And again, I do think some of the world building is interesting, like
Mm-hmm.
the mother world sort of being basically the empire,
Empire.
and then this character of Korra I thought was really well written. At least the introduction to her and the fact that she's a former Imperial. A couple of the characters are former Imperials, and we only see a
Yeah.
tease of this character who's kind of usurped the throne from this emperor who's
Yeah.
played by a very famous actor I didn't even know was in the movie,
Me neither.
which is cool.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that works like even in Dune that's half of a movie, and that's like
Right.
you don't even see the emperor, but that I feel like was built a lot better because you felt the characteristics, you felt something to connect with them, you felt like there was like a flow to the story. I guess this one, when I realized that this was like the climax, I was like, oh, okay, so I guess that's where we're at. And
Yeah, no, it's a repetitive, tedious film, especially in that second half when we're recruiting the team and they
mhm,
do the same thing where it's just like, all right, we got to get this cool character, so let's watch them do something cool and have no understanding of why they're joining this team. They're just like, oh, you want? Oh, sure, I'll risk my life to fight for
yeah,
these people in this small village that I don't even know if it's real or not. So yeah, it's a
mhm,
very going back to the Dune comparison. At least we saw Paul Atreides in the House of you know, the Duke family and building all that. Like this story, we're just thrown in here with no context, no depth, no backstory. We're just watching characters just do one thing, which is just this is literally a team hopping around of like, hey, let's go pick up a friend to join this journey. It's just a very
yeah.
uninspiring, dull experience, which is unfortunate because again, this is Zack Snyder that we're talking about, the guy that did the unimaginable with the Watchmen, which is said to be one of the most something that's impossible to adapt, and someone that brought the awesome story of 300. So it's very
Mhm.
unfortunate, and disappointing that this is the first attempt to opening this IP because it seemed like it was just like I mentioned earlier, just a copy and paste of like 1,000 other sci-fi films we've seen before.
Yeah, and even in Dune, like you mentioned, both of these films are supposed to be like these serious space operas, and this is with that supposed to have its quirks and its cheeky moments. If you see Dune, it's very serious, but then there's
Yeah.
Josh Brolin and Jason Momoa's performances, which are kind of
Mm-hmm.
funny. Here, the comic relief or like the weirdness to it really just missed the mark for me. It just felt a lot more annoying. Like it felt like the worst parts of this is a much worse movie, but Jupiter Ascending. Like, I don't think that's a too terrible comparison to like some of the weird side characters in this film.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Again, Charlie Hunnam, who is such a great actor and can turn every personality into something interesting. Like when he's
Mm-hmm.
kind of weak,
Yeah,
Jenna
yeah,
Malone.
that's a
It's
good
good to
point.
see her in another movie, but I don't know if I loved her character that much either.
I didn't even realize
Um,
it was her until they had the more close up scenes to because she's in a prosthetic
Yeah, me neither.
design.
The second movie, look, it has to be better because that's sort of where I guess the action
The
will
war.
be,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the war will be.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think like the road to get there. I don't know what it would have looked like as one movie, but here it definitely felt like they were kind of leaving too much of the characters and the world building of it.
Mm-hmm.
Not even up to our imagination, but just not inviting enough.
Yeah, no,
if
I
if that
agree,
makes
man.
sense. Especially the main villain, played by Ed Skrein. Like I said, I just at
Oh,
one point he really got on
Admiral
my nerves.
Noble. Yeah,
Admiral Noble. Oh my goodness.
yeah.
That's a very original name.
It's not the worst, but it's definitely nowhere near the best. I am very curious to see if they release the Snyder cut of this before part two,
I think
because
that's the plan.
apparently. Okay, because apparently, knowing a little bit of part two, the Scar Giver, it is going to be
Mhm.
kind of like the Dune comparison, part two, where it's going to be more of the war, more of that stuff, moving at a faster pace. But apparently, we're going to get also all the stuff that this first film was missing, and even on the Snyder cut of it, part two is going to be more of the backstory. So it's going to be so interesting that we're going to be going backwards instead of for forward. So we're going to understand what happened to General Titus and what happened to his men and why he's the drunken person that we see. We're going to get more of Korra's backstory of what happened to her, inevitably leaving the Empire and all that stuff. So it's going to be weird. I'm curious to know if that is going to be the definitive cut of part two, or if there's going to be another situation where it's like, well, there's another version. Where, so I don't know, man. It's going to be really interesting to
Yeah, I
see
wonder
because
because
all
that
in the
sounds like
span
a
of six
long
months.
movie.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
wonder
to
if
get
they're kind of setting
backstory.
up like part two is just the flashbacks and this one battle on that planet that Korra lives
I
on,
think it
or it's
is.
also
That's
more
what I'm.
stuff.
No, I
Um,
think it's literally backstory and current storyline, which is the battle. I think that's literally the narrative of this new one. But I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Yeah, we'll see.
which yeah, to me just doesn't feel as rewarding when I look at that, like compared to
Yeah.
splitting Dune into two movies. And with you, original sci-fi, I'm a huge sci-fi fan,
Hmm.
so definitely still had me curious, even though I had my hesitations with Zack Snyder.
Yeah.
Um, when executed well, even one that's a little derivative like The Creator, I thought was
Hmm.
executed very well. But this
Yeah.
one, I just thought it didn't feel visually inviting enough, and the characters just didn't have that dynamic that the
Yeah.
story needed. And again, the structure just at one point, I just realized, okay, we're doing this again, and like the climax of this one,
Hmm.
which is not the climax of the whole story, kind of just felt like, oh, okay, this is the climax now.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's how I feel.
Hmm.
I wouldn't go as far as to say it's one of the worst of the year,
Yeah.
but
No. No. No.
definitely
By far.
with this interesting passion that Snyder had and some cool world building, I would have liked a much better movie.
Yeah. Same here. Same here, man. Same here.